During my high school days, I was a member of the track and field club and practiced sprints. I was an avid athlete and would practice even after school closed at night. However, I didn't stay at school to practice, but instead ran on the roads around my house. The best place to practice was the sidewalk of a bridge about 100 meters long. I could practice my 100-meter dash to my heart's content, which was impossible in residential areas. However, there was a problem with the bridge. It was about 30 meters high, so it was necessary to cross a river where suicides occurred. The bridge had a few streetlights and was a perfect spot for people who wanted to commit suicide, and there were often flowers placed at the midpoint of the bridge, which seemed to be the jumping point. I was passionate about running faster than the speed at which people who committed suicide were heading to the afterlife, so I didn't care about that and just used the bridge for practice. In fact, I was so enthusiastic that I even patrolled the bridge to make sure no one committed suicide. Then one day, I came across a strange sight. A girl in a white dress had disappeared on the sidewalk of the bridge at night, and as I gazed suspiciously from afar, I saw a ghost with legs. Ahead of where the girl had finished running, I saw several figures. Some were carrying square equipment, some were holding spear-like poles, and some were holding lights. It seemed to be a filming site for a movie or something, or a film production site run by a group of students. However, their actions were so aggressive that they were like, "That's in the way, isn't it? But if you touch it, it's dangerous, so it's fine. So let's just throw it away." I think they were talking about breasts. One of the members walked to the middle of the bridge, picked up something, and threw it into the river. Oh, hey, that place was enveloped in a strange silence. I didn't have the courage to complain to the older group, so after they left, I went to a store in the middle of the bridge. As expected, the vase that had been there the day before was gone. What the hell did they do to it? I was shocked in many ways. The next day, I headed to the bridge, thinking that I would place some suitable wildflowers in place of the discarded flowers. I said this out loud without thinking the moment I arrived at the bridge. The walkway of the bridge was dyed the purple color of the evening sun, and in the place where flowers are usually placed, there was a huge bouquet of flowers placed there. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that they were piled high in a mountain. The amount was about the same as 2 large garbage bags. What's more, all the bouquets were brown and dried up, but the pure white wrapping paper that was holding them together seemed to be strangely twisted and caught my eye eerily. It was clear that they were not the refreshing kind of dried flowers. Perhaps it was the strange behavior of angry family members who had abandoned their unloved deceased flowers. In any case, I was terrified and quickly left the wildflowers I had collected there and left the area. I walked a little way and looked back at the bridge in the distance. That's when something strange caught my eye. From a gap in the bridge's railing, something whitish and rod-like was reaching out towards the bridge's sidewalk. If that was a human arm, then it was someone who had been hanging onto the outside of the bridge, reaching their arm out towards the sidewalk and trying to climb up. Yes, that couldn't be a human. Thinking that it was an intuition that I hadn't seen before, I squinted my eyes, ready for it. At that moment, a listless woman's voice rang out, and the seaweed-like provocation, covered in water, protruded from the gap in the rack onto the sidewalk with a thud. Its head also rose up, and I could see its face. Just as I was about to look away, it suddenly appeared. This time, a pale human head-like thing covered in provocation protruded with a grin, grabbed the wildflower I had placed down, and gobbled it into its mouth. The figure was dragged to the other side of the bridge with all its hair, and the gap was so wide that a human head could not get through it no matter what. The pale head slipped through the gap, deforming as it went. In the next moment, I was running all the way home, sure to beat the fastest record in school. Damn, it was a good idea to train my leg strength. The next morning, my mother told me not to go to that bridge again. I was surprised and wondered if my mother had psychic powers. When I asked her why, she said that someone who lives near the bridge saw something burning on the bridge, and that it might have been the work of a crazy person like her, so I shouldn't go there alone again. That something that was burning. I told her about the withered bouquet of flowers I saw yesterday. I didn't mention a monster, but then the bouquet was burning, and that would make the story a little strange. From what my mother had gathered from the stories of the local residents, the flames had been burning on the bridge for several hours. And apparently, someone had seen the dead flowers burning for such a long time. I wondered how it was possible for dead flowers to continue to burn for such a long time. So I decided to go to the bridge again on my way home from school that day. However, I was scared and couldn't do it alone, so I took one of my club friends with me and we headed to the scene on our school bicycles. We arrived at the bridge at about the same time as when we arrived the day before, and it was dark outside. I called out to my friend who was driving, "Don't go any further," and we stopped the bicycle about 20 meters from the midpoint of the bridge. It's dangerous to approach suddenly, but even without being told, I don't want to come to a suicide spot like this. My friend is a bit of a scaredy cat by nature, so I think something was burning around there. He points to the spot and I peer into the dim light. Before we knew it, the wind had started to blow. Who's that? Something fluffy is falling down in the middle. What's that? It's white hair the size of a magazine, isn't it? It seems like there are many of them lined up along the sidewalk of the bridge. It's strange. The hairs are fluttering in the wind, but stay in place and don't fly away. My friend and I walk over to her. Her pure white hair looks like the remains of the wrapping paper from the bouquet we saw yesterday. We get within a few meters of her hair and realize why it hasn't been blown away. It was nailed to the ground by the sidewalk. My friend and I were stunned. "Is there anything written in this hair?" my friend said. Certainly, whenever the hair fluttered, I could see something written on one side of it as it lay on the ground. Having come this far, I took the plunge and peeled the hair off the nail, turned it over, and looked at the back, and there was a bright red handprint. In the center of the pure white hair was a tiny red handprint the size of a baby's, and in the center of the handprint, there was a hole where the nail had been. "What is this?" My friend had already removed some other hairs from the nails and was looking at them. These two had handprints, footprints, and a strange picture. It was an ancient mural-like picture, made up of small, bright red handprints and footprints, and simple red lines that looked like a bird. There were nail marks in the bird's eyes. A woman's head was screaming on the transom at her feet. A pale woman's head, strangely elongated and deformed, was stuck in the gap between the shelves, with its mouth wide open. She was covered in wet provocation, and nothing was visible except her mouth. Her teeth were strangely white. Her torso was hanging loosely outside the rack. We screamed too. The woman's head appeared between me and my friend, so my friend and I ran away in opposite directions at full speed. We left our bikes behind and reached the bridge. There was no sign of anyone chasing us. There were no screams. I stopped and called out to my friend, "You've run away. Have you escaped safely?" My friend answered, breathing heavily, "I'm fine. But what's going on? What should I do? What should I do?" My friend had left his bike at the scene. His house was in the opposite direction from where he'd fled, so he was really stressed out over the fact that he couldn't get home without hitting another bridge. The clock on his cell phone was past 8 o'clock. It was dark on the other side of the bridge. and he couldn't see where his friend was. And of all things, not a single car had come. Okay, let's call for help. We'll lie and say your bike is broken and call a parent or a friend and have them bring a car. I'll try it too. No, I don't want to come and pick you up, please. You licked your friend's phone and hung up, dialing your mother. But it didn't connect, or rather it didn't even ring, which meant that when I checked the screen, it said, outside the prefecture, so why was I with that guy earlier? Now, it was my friend who was calling me. What is this unsorted zone? Hello? Applause. It wasn't my friend's voice. I immediately heard her voice. But the woman's screams continued. It was longer than a normal person's lung capacity could handle. I realized my friend wasn't safe. Damn, I had to go to my friend right now. It would be irreversible. It might be too late. But the screams continued. I turned off my phone and ran to the other side of the bridge to where my friend was. I didn't want to pass by the railing, so I ran down the middle of the road instead of the sidewalk. Something seemed to be lurking in the deep darkness between the few streetlights that stood between them, and as I ran, I nearly went crazy. Then, as I reached the halfway point, a black shadow approached me from the darkness in front of me with great force. I instantly forgot about helping my friend and dashed back along the north road. I am that shadow. How many times have you tried to surprise me? I want this to be the last time I ever run. With tears and a runny nose, the shadow is still following me, and I can hear the sound of the edge. Hey, why are you running away? My friend's voice is coming from behind. The identity of the voice was a friend. Apparently he was scared because he had missed the message, but he put his mind off it and ran towards me. You said, come over, on the phone just now. And yet you said you were going out of the prefecture and now you screamed, I said, which made me really flustered. The phone call was in the bag of my bicycle bag, but he seemed to think I was going to threaten him in a situation like this, as he answered with a suspicious look. Friend. So, the person I was talking to, thinking he was a friend, was... After that, we trudged home together. I lost my bike and smelled of flowers. It was very inconvenient for my friend to walk side by side with me. We were exhausted and didn't talk to each other. As we walked down the night road, I wondered what on earth would have been waiting for us if we had made it across the bridge, and what would have happened to me. I nearly let my tears out again, but I had already run out of tears. That bridge has had a long history of bad rumors and such. Later, I talked to an old man who was knowledgeable about the area and its history. Oh, that area is like this, Grandpa said, bending his thumb and holding out 4 fingers. 4-legged. Do you know that there used to be people of that status? There are still people like that today, but what kind of work did these people who couldn't get decent jobs do back then? In addition to working with 4-legged animals, that is, livestock for food, in my area it seems that picking up gravel from the river was a heavy job. The gravel from the river in one hospital room was sold to construction companies at a high price. Of course, people who worked hard to collect gravel also showed up. However, at that time, there was not even a dam, and it was a rough river with many water-blocking incidents throughout the year. Later, a dam was built and the water level stabilized, so a bridge was built. But there was one story I heard from my grandpa that was even more eerie. A mysterious hair that was found on the bridge that day. My friend and I had unknowingly stuffed it in our pockets and brought it home. The 2 of us burned it and wrapped a little salt around the entrance and room of our house. Currently, nothing has changed, and I still don't know if what my grandpa was talking about is related to the strange phenomenon on the bridge. But anyway, Neither I nor my friends will ever go to that bridge again, except by car. This is a story that happened while I was watching a video. I used it as background music while studying for exams. I was listening to a ghost story video on YouTube, and that day, I was watching a video on another channel posted by someone on the channel I usually watch. The video was about the poster and a woman with psychic powers crossing a bridge where many suicides occur. As the poster and A were crossing the bridge, I happened to see an unidentified woman standing there. At that time, I was feeling abnormally heavy on my right side and unable to lift my arm. Also, I was holding a ballpoint pen in my right hand at the time, but a large object was placed on my right hand, large enough to cover my hand. I saw something like an eyeball. This continued for about 10 minutes after watching the video, and after a while, the abnormality disappeared. At the time, I didn't feel particularly scared. When I told a local about this later, he said it was too scary. The clean ghost on the bridge. This happened more than 10 years ago. The local produce company I joined as a new graduate was very busy because it was a new startup. I was called in at 5 a.m. and was often kept there until 2 a.m. Naturally, I ended up sleeping in my car more often, and it was littered with garbage from everyday items and food I had bought at convenience stores. One time, I was working at the company until 2 a.m. due to a problem with the water treatment plant, and on my way home, I stopped by a large supermarket that was open 24 hours a day. I had to cross a small bridge to get to the supermarket, and perhaps because I was extremely tired or it was the time of day, I ended up putting something strange in the car. I was fighting sleep and trying not to cause an accident. As I was driving slowly, I felt the presence of someone in the car, which should have been empty except for me. I checked the rearview mirror and saw a young-looking woman in the passenger seat. I was tired and my thoughts were not working well, so I just thought, "Who's there?" But she suddenly disappeared from the rearview mirror, and the next moment she had moved to the passenger seat. Then she said, "I'm sorry," and disappeared. I've been sleeping in my car for a long time, and it was full of garbage and daily necessities. So to be honest, I didn't want to have anyone else in the car. I knew I couldn't do that. But when someone I'd never met before and didn't remember giving me a ride said something like that to me, it flipped a switch in me, and I stopped the car right there and cried in the empty space, screaming that it wasn't supposed to happen to me either. That morning, a truck driver or someone else reported the incident to the police, and I was taken into custody by the police. I felt like I had reached my limit, so I quit my job right away. I claimed my unpaid overtime and other payments, and after they were all transferred to me, I changed my car to a new one and visited the bridge again, and at the same time as that day, I crossed the bridge. I drove slowly and said, "How is this? I'm sure you won't have any complaints." Then, without any warning, the woman got in the passenger seat again and laughed happily, but when I sneezed, she said, "Oh no," again and disappeared. I thought she should have been forgiving me for that, but I was going back to my parents' house the next day, so I haven't been to that bridge since then. I'm still a little grateful to her for giving me the opportunity to quit my job. It gave me courage. I like mountain climbing, and whenever I have a long weekend, I always go climbing. I like this mountain so much that it's not that high, but the path is steep and people get lost there every year. The path is not well maintained, so it's a mountain that is often overlooked, even by climbers. I really liked this mountain because there were not many people there. It was as if it belonged to me alone. One day, I went climbing the mountain. The chirps of the birds and the sound of the flowing river were refreshing. After walking for a while, I came across a suspension bridge. I had to go through there to get to a certain summit. When I came to the suspension bridge, there was a man. The man looked strange. He was standing on the railing and just staring down. I quickly went over. It was dangerous. Then the man noticed and turned towards me. I realized he was trying to jump off and commit suicide. I continued, "If you die, how will your wife and children live? Don't commit suicide." I think he said something like that. I don't know who the man's family is. He just said something like something I'd seen in a detective drama. The man looked at me and gave me courage. I think he said that. I thought he'd stopped trying to commit suicide, and I was glad. But then the man suddenly let go of my hand. He jumped off. I immediately called 119. We were deep in the mountains, at the bottom of a valley, several tens of meters deep. The man didn't survive. I later found out that the man had taken out an insurance policy, made it look like an accident, and then committed suicide. I explained the situation to the ambulance crew, but of course, they didn't pay out the insurance money. I was left with a bad taste in my mouth, so ever since then I've pretended not to see any victims. I heard this from a woman I used to date, who was very sensitive to spirits. I asked her if she had ever had any experiences that were so scary that she couldn't stand it, even though she had had many spiritual experiences up until now. I don't know if I can convey the horror of the situation well when I tell it, but out of all the stories I've heard from various places, the most frightening one happened 19 years ago near a dam called Edam in the mountains of Adventure. In fact, she worked at a home appliance store, and that day she went alone to deliver a TV that had been ordered to a certain town. By chance, her aunt lived in that town, and she also had the specifications, so before the delivery, she stopped by her house and asked her if she knew the house where the TV was to be delivered. When she asked the lady, she told her that the customer's house was just a stone's throw away from her house, and she successfully completed the delivery of the TV. Before leaving, she wanted to stop by the neighboring police station on her way home, so she asked again if there was a shortcut from there, and she was told of a back road that went by Adam. She then took that road and arrived there. It was dark and eerie that day, but she didn't pay much attention and was told it was a shortcut. She had been driving on a single road in the mountains, but it was about time to go down the mountain and enter the police station, but she never left the mountain road. In fact, the asphalt pavement had disappeared, and she was on a very narrow, bumpy road, just wide enough for one car to pass through. She was worried that she had taken the wrong road when an old lady passed by on her way home from farm work. She asked the old lady if she had met her on the way out to Konohashi, to which she replied, "No, this is the wrong road. There is a house a little further ahead and another house in front of it. I'm tired, so I'm feeling lonely." She thanked her and drove to the house she had been told about. After a while, just as the old lady had said, a house came into view, and it was a huge mansion, and in the middle of the mountains, there was a shed and a dark house, and it had the appearance of an old, wealthy farmer. Anyway, she was going to park her car in front of the house, but at that moment, the old lady who had given her directions earlier was standing next to her car for some reason. She had driven for quite a distance, so why was the old lady she had just said goodbye to in such a place? She felt a little uneasy, but opened the window anyway and thanked her again. The old lady then said, "Since we've come all this way, why don't we go and have some tea at home?" She strongly urged her to go, so she got out of the car, guided by her. Her memory is clear from this point on, but she had the feeling that she was being controlled by something other than her own will. Then the old woman turned towards the house and muttered something unintelligible. "Grandpa Kyoko has come home." And in response, the grandfather came out of the house and called out to her, "Oh, welcome home, Kyoko." Something she couldn't understand at all. Her name wasn't Kyoko, and the old couple, even though she was a stranger who had met them for the first time that day, they gazed at her intently. She looked over at Naya in shock, but of course, she couldn't see what was going on inside. She held back her guilt and sat down on the veranda as the old man urged her to. Even after she sat down on the veranda, the old man continued to say the same incomprehensible things to her, like, "Welcome back, Kyoko." So she decided that the old man must have had a bit of a country streak. "No, I'm just a passerby, not Kyoko," she said, but the old man didn't listen to her at all. The next moment she lost consciousness, and suddenly she found herself sitting alone with the old man in the Buddhist altar in the room. She didn't know why she had lost consciousness, but the old man started talking to her one-sidedly again. "During the day, everyone else was quiet and I was alone," he said, trying to endure her creepiness. "Is that so? But maybe there's someone in Naya's house." When she asked, "Is that the child?" the grandfather replied, "Yes, that's my grandson, but I just left him here because I wanted to keep him." "Ah, is he suffering from an illness?" "That's terrible." At that moment, someone grabbed her arm tightly. Shocked, she looked at her arm and saw that a girl of about 3 years old was holding her arm. She had no idea when she had come into the room, but the girl stared at her with an expressionless face. She instinctively realized that something was strange about this house and tried to run away, but her body would not listen to her. Then the grandfather scolded the girl, saying, "This woman is not your mother." The next moment she could hardly believe her eyes. The girl suddenly jumped on the grandfather and bit him in the neck. Her face was completely different from the expressionless one she had before, and she bared her fangs like a beast, her eyes glowing red and eerie. According to her, her face was truly hair-raising and terrifying. Anyway, she had already reached her limit. She tried to get up to run away, but her body would not listen to her. When she looked at herself, countless hands reached out from under the tatami mat and grabbed her. But that was not all. As they grabbed her, the countless hands said to her, "You finally come back to your husband, haven't you? You can't run away anymore." She was on the verge of losing consciousness. Then, when she looked at the old man next to her, the little girl who had been biting his neck until a moment ago was no longer an old man, but a middle-aged man in his 40s. The man, as if in tune with the voices of the people around him, said to her with a grin, "You can't go back today, can you?" She was in a truly hopeless situation. The nightmare situation changed when the former old man suddenly stood up, grabbed her hand and took her outside. She was taken outside the house without being able to resist and made to stand in front of the storehouse. Not knowing why, she was frightened, and the man said to her, "You can't go back today, can you?" He opened the tower and showed her what was inside. Inside the storehouse was a room that you see in period dramas, and inside was a woman lying down. She timidly asked the man, "Who is this?" And the man replied with a grin, "It's your sister?" She was on the verge of panic and wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. When she looked to the side, she saw that the car she had been in was still in the same place. At one point, she managed to shake off the man and run to her car. But suddenly, the old woman she had first met appeared in front of the car and placed a dead crow on the windshield, glaring at her and saying, "Kiko, you're not going anywhere, are you?" Desperately trying to keep from going crazy, she pushed the dead crow off the windshield, got into the car, and desperately tried to start the engine. As is typical in this kind of story, the car's engine didn't start up, but it finally started, and she quickly turned the car around and drove back the way she came. It would have been fine if the story had ended there, without her even looking back. But the spirit that possessed her at that time was not so gentle. Even though she had been driving along the single road she had come on, for some reason the road narrowed more and more until it was too narrow for a car to pass through. She stood there, wondering what to do, when she vaguely saw a red bridge that hadn't been there when she had arrived at the road ahead. Next, the old woman was standing next to the car and said, "I can't go back. That bridge is yours. I made this for you so you can't cross it," she said through the car window. She had already made up her mind and switched cars. As she backed up, ignoring the old woman who was trying to escape as far as she could, the old woman stuck upside down to the windshield of the car and kept screaming, "I can't let you get away! I can't let you get away!" She ignored the old woman who continued screaming, stuck to the window, and kept on switching cars. But this time the red bridge she had seen earlier came into view up ahead. By that time, she had run out of options, and it was all she could do. She thought that it was the bridge she was being called to, and got out of the car. She unconsciously started to walk towards the bridge when she heard the voice of the grandmother who had raised her as a child speaking directly to her in her head, saying, "Maru Maru-chan, if you go over there, you can't go." At that moment, she once again lost consciousness. When she came to, she was driving the car, and after driving for a while, she finally arrived at a familiar asphalt road. It was the moment she was released from her life in the old province, or should I say, from the first block of the afterlife. Those who have read this story may think that it is just a joke, but it is indisputably her true experience, and her fears did not end there. There was a fateful incident related to the dam. That night, she returned home exhausted and casually checked her belongings and found that some important things were missing. She noticed that her driver's license, which she had had until that morning, had disappeared, and went to the police station to apply for a reissue that same day. What was unbelievable was that just after this, when she went to the police station, her driver's license, which had been discovered, had been reported as lost property. She tried to go through the procedure to pick it up, but the photo on the driver's license was not hers, but a completely different person's. Naturally, the police were concerned that it might be a forgery or a crime, so that they decided to keep her license for a while. Upon inspection, it was found that, aside from the fact that the photo had been swapped with her own, it was a license from Koshin Shome that showed no signs of forgery. Later, I learned through the police that the person in the photo was Kyoko, the daughter of an otaku called Eike, who had delivered the TV on the day she had her frightening experience. Furthermore, the person in the photo had been in a traffic accident 2 years earlier, near the place where she had her frightening experience. The grandmother of FFF who had dodged the TV was the daughter of a wealthy farmer in the area, and when she was young, she had a falling out with her family and ran away. After eloping, she apparently lived in Tokyo for a long time, but by coincidence, the daughter married a man from the town where the grandmother's family lives in Wa Prefecture, and as she grew older, she returned to her hometown to be taken in by the daughter and her husband. The deceased Kyoko was the child, or granddaughter, of the aunt's daughter, and was the same age at the time of her death as the woman who had the terrifying experience. Apparently, the house where the grandmother's family lived, the haunted mansion she was led to and wandered into, had long ago sunk to the bottom of the dam. It seems like there are more shocking facts to come in this rather fateful story, but that's all I heard from her today. She said she'll tell me the rest the next time we meet. For now, I've compiled what I've heard so far. While I still remember it, but it's really unbelievable. But it seems like there are gaping holes to other worlds waiting for us all over the world where we go about our daily lives. When I was a student in Kami, Hokkaido, there was a place I used to visit often, about a 5-minute bike ride away. That night, I was wearing a tracksuit and sandals, carrying my bathing supplies as I got on my bike. I rode straight down the road for a few hundred meters to my destination, crossed a bridge, and then went about 100 meters before turning. There were many vacant lots and parking areas around, and since it was night, no one was around. I was in a good mood, humming as I pedaled at full speed, when I saw someone far ahead of me. The town in Hokkaido had good visibility, so even from a distance, I could tell the person was on the bridge. From his build, he looked like a man, but I immediately noticed something strange. He was kneeling on the bridge, in a peculiar position, with both arms bent, as if he was desperately clinging to something. I wondered if he was a drunk person throwing up, but I was wrong. He had his neck bent and his face turned towards me. As usual, there was no one around, so I assumed he was the only one there. There was no doubt that he was looking at me as I pedaled my bike. His coat was flapping in the wind, but he remained in the same position, facing me. Maybe he was crazy, but maybe he had something to ask. Two thoughts ran through my head. Meanwhile, my feet were unconsciously pedaling, so the distance between us was getting shorter and shorter. When the distance had narrowed to about 50 meters, I noticed he was wearing sparkling glasses. Those deep eyes were fixed on me. He really did have something to do with me. At that moment, I must have been in a situation where he was being taken care of. The only thoughts that came to my mind were that I had to help him, that I had to stop and call out to him. The bike kept moving, and finally it came to a crosswalk just before the bridge. I called out, "Excuse me," and was about to cross the road when that guy's mouth started moving. I thought he was going to say something to me, but I was wrong. He was laughing with his mouth wide open. As he laughed, his face split diagonally into 2 rows, and his hands were no longer holding on to anything. His fingertips, covered in blood, were twirling and moaning as if beckoning me. In an instant, I realized everything. The wash basin I was holding fell and rolled onto the road. I was so lucky that I was able to quickly get my hands on the handlebars. I grabbed the brakes with all my might, and it was a narrow escape. When the light turned green, I got onto the road, picked up the basin, which had been crushed to pieces along with the soap inside, and pushed my bike across the bridge. I'm sure I'd seen a small one there a few times before. I decided to buy new wind gear, except for the towel, at the store. I had no intention of turning back. The afterglow of fear lingered on for a long time, and I couldn't help but tremble. Now that I had noticed him, I intuitively knew that I couldn't let him defeat me until the very end. With trembling legs, I crossed the bridge. I pushed my bike forward for a while, then cautiously looked back towards the bridge. There he was. He wasn't there when I crossed the bridge, but he was kneeling in the same place again. Even from a distance, I could clearly see that he was looking at me, facing the opposite direction from before. Sweat was pouring out of my body. "Give up already. Please, don't pull me over there," I yelled in my mind, but there was no sign of him. Still, as I desperately prayed, he looked uneasy as he turned away, the way he had been looking chaotic, and turned his head to the other side again. Perhaps he had given up, so I hurriedly got on my bike and headed to my destination. I felt a little calmer and more at ease after taking a bath. After leaving the store, I called my friends, and as if it were my role, we drank and made noise until the morning. When I returned to my lodgings, the chief had already been stabbed in the mailbox. As I opened it in the room where I had been, my eyes fell on a certain piece of fabric, and I was shocked. I understood why he had suddenly turned away. The people in the article were students, and they were heading to the same destination, a store. And the accident happened at almost the same time that I had arrived. I was overcome with a tremendous sense of guilt, and the paper in my hands was about to become blurry with tears. During my lunch break, I went to that bridge and could see from a distance the traces of dirt that had been smudged all over the transom. It was clear from a distance that the number of marks had doubled. It was pitiful, but I didn't have the courage to get any closer. I clasped my hands together from afar and ran away. I never used that bridge again.